So hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So today's visiting artist is Emily Endo, and she is a multimedia artist who primarily works with glass, but will kind of work with a bunch of different material with fibers and metals and kind of integrating those together. I know Emily from Portland, Oregon, from when we used to live there. And she creates such fascinating work where she'll kind of create this concept for a show, and then create pieces that kind of morph off of each other. And then she sets these up in such a unique way that it kind of creates this experience when you're walking into this space that is completely different than what you'd normally see with glass art. And now she's in Southern California, and she'll talk a little bit about that. But let's welcome Emily.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. That was such a lovely description of my work. I'm so flattered.
Sure. Okay, so my first question is, what types of materials, concepts, or projects do you typically work with?
Well, as far as materials go, I've always loved working with a wide spectrum of materials, and I'm always looking for the right material for the project. And so in the past few years, I've worked with a lot of glass. I've started integrating scent into my work. I've used a lot of textiles. My background is actually in fibers, so I like to bring in fiber whenever I can. Leather, jewelry, but a lot of it, and I've been bringing in a lot of stones lately too, found rocks and stones, so everything, but a lot of glass in the last, I'd say, 10 years. And my work has always centered around magic, transformation, the body's relationship to environment, nature. And since moving to Southern California, where I actually grew up, I live out in Joshua Tree in the desert now, and but I grew up in San Diego, and which is just a couple hours west of here. And since moving back to Southern California, I've been thinking a lot about water. I've been thinking about the fantasy of water, the beach. We're close to Palm Springs, which is literally an oasis. You know, there's like tons of mall fountains and swimming pools in the middle of the desert. And then at my own home in the desert, we're constantly collecting water, reusing water, thinking about water. And so a lot of my work has become about water, which I find really exciting. And I've been interested in water as a metaphor for just kind of the permeable boundaries between the human body and the environment, and the permeable boundaries between countries and continents. And I found it to be a really interesting place to start playing with, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, coming from Portland, Oregon, where there's so much water, right? the rainfall brings so much. So yeah, so it's an interesting contrast for you with that. So do you want me to show or do you want to start off with the quote?
You know what, let's start off with the work now and end with the quote, if that's okay.
That sounds great. So let me share this screen. Try and do full screen. No.
So this is an example of one of my recent pieces. It's called Water Baby. And it's a life-size female bust made out of glass. So it's actually hollow, and it functions as a fountain. And so the blue that you see in the body is actually dyed water that's pumping through the glass vessel. And then the water has been scented with flowers and salt water, so that it emits this kind of oceanic floral scent when you're nearby. And that's, again, just relating to this idea of the body being permeable and thinking about the body's relationship to water. I also have been really interested in ancient sculpture and representations of the female body in ancient sculpture. So this is an example of that too, looking at Greek and Roman artworks.
Now, was this a piece that you did originally do the form of the figure and then created a mold for that, or?
Yeah. I started with a base figure that was actually from a mannequin, and then I did a bunch of hand sculpting on it, and then I made a mold and then cast it into glass. So there's a lot of little steps that go in between, yeah. But it's a mixture of, it's mainly hand sculpted.
Okay, that's fantastic. All right, we'll go to the next one.
And then this one is from the same body of work. This piece is called Neon Venus, and it's 2 conch shells. And I had a friend of mine who blows glass, blow glass bubbles directly into the conch shell, so they fit in kind of perfectly in there. And then they're both fountains, and they have liquid pumping through them. But the combined scent of the two is supposed to smell like a neon rose, because the blue water is scented with white roses, and then the pink water is scented to smell like electrical smoke. So when you stand in between, it's supposed to be like a neon rose. And I was looking at a lot of, again, representations of the female form in our history. So things like Venus on a half shell, thinking about shells, bubbles, and also just these kind of expanding and contracting skins.
Wow. Yeah, so that's such an interesting concept to kind of play around with and take it in this direction.
Yeah, I really like the idea of creating a scent that comes together in different places within the gallery. That was something I was exploring a lot. Nice. So this kind of takes me to what I've been working on recently. So I think of it as maybe a 3-part practice. The first part for me is the studio, and the studio, like you can see, I really focus on whatever material makes sense, and following different conceptual ideas. And then the second part of my practice is teaching, and teaching hands-on skills. And then the third is actually more of a curatorial practice. My partner, Michael, and I have a gallery called Dust to Dust that was in Portland for a while, and now it's kind of an online and pop-up curatorial project. So I think of my practice in kind of like these 3 different ways. But the second part of my talk today, I wanted to talk about the teaching aspect. Since I've moved down to the desert, I've become really interested in using eco-friendly practices and earth-friendly practices, and working with local plants, and trying to come up with sustainable systems. So this slide is of a bunch of different dye samples I did using plants from the desert. So it's a combination of prickly pear. Some of the swatches are prickly pear, cactus fruit, cochineal bugs from the cactus paddles, rabbit brush sage, white sage, wild dock, and let's see what else is in there. And saltbush. And then, and actually, if we can go to the next slide. So this is an example of some different dye samples using saltbush, which is a plant that grows all over the desert here. And I was researching Navajo dye practices and Navajo traditions, and started learning about using this plant for that. So that's been a big part of my research lately, is just thinking about how to grow things on my land, how to learn more about the environment around me, and also changing up my practices so that things can go, the water, again, coming back to water, making sure that all the dye water can go back into my garden or my compost. So changing up the type of mordants I use, all that kind of stuff. And I know that, I don't think you guys have hit natural dyeing yet, but that'll all make, oh, you have?
Yeah, I introduced a little bit of it last class. What's the mordant that you use then?
I've been playing around with soybeans,
Oh, wow.
and also with, I never know how to, I need to look up how to say it, Symblocos, which is a type of leaf that falls in India, and it's really high in alum. Also things like pomegranate, sumac, and things like that that have natural clear tannins in them. Instead of using things that have heavy metals. When I went to school, we were using, even when we did natural dyes, we used things like mercury and just like heavy metals, salts, and that stuff is not, even alum is not great to dump into your, into the land or into the, back into the water streams. And I guess I didn't really introduce my living situation. I live out in Joshua Tree in the desert. We have a couple acres, and I teach classes at my home. It's called the High Desert Observatory. And we've been working on turning it into a permaculture site. So we've been doing water collection, composting, trying to grow native species in the yard, and just make sure everything can kind of fit into that world. And so a lot of these things too, I collect rainwater, and then and do the dyeing, and then that has to go back into the land and to get dumped in the yard. And so if I dump something in my yard that has, or down into my septic tank that has some kind of chemical in it, that's going to leach into my land where I'm growing food. And so it's become this really interesting, really closed system. And I wasn't that aware of, I didn't really think that way before moving out here. I always tried to be somewhat eco-friendly, but I didn't really have the same investment in it or think about it. It just wasn't the same for me because it wasn't like my part of my everyday life. Does that make sense? I feel like
for sure. Yeah, because with dyeing, there's so much water that's used. And so especially in your area, being able to kind of conserve that water as best you can is really important. We have a ton of oak galls up here if you want. Cool. I don't know if you have any down there, but yeah, they're just everywhere here. And so, yeah, I love that the colors that you're able to get. So I've been joking with my students that everything I try to do turns out a lovely shade of brown. And that, you know, so, but I appreciate brown now. I appreciate the tans and these like subtle shifts, like, ooh, there's like a golden brown with this one.
I know. Well, it's funny too. I mean, I spent a lot of time, so I was researching Navajo dyes, and then and different dye methods, and then started going through just even like documentation of Navajo textiles and textiles from this area and what plants were used. And so saltbush is one of them, and I couldn't find any instructions on how to use it, but because I found records of it being used in rug dyeing, I started doing all this, like a bunch of testing myself on how to use it. And so it's been really an interesting dialogue with the landscape here for me.
Fantastic. I know I now walk down the street like, ooh, could that make a dye? Ooh, what's that?
And you know, the other thing too is I kind of need something like that to get me to learn stuff, you know, like to learn about, it helps me. For me, it's an entry point into learning about my surroundings and learning about nature. But I've also had to learn a lot about, you know, just, you know, the ethics of taking plants and the ethics of growing plants and all that kind of stuff. So it's been a really interesting journey for me. And one of my favorite types of dye is actually a prickly pear dye. And instead of heating it up like you usually think of, it's actually, you can do a 2-week fermentation process to get this, to get a dye from it, to get this kind of magenta color. And I think that being out in the desert and just learning more about these processes has given me a new respect for time. I've been thinking a lot about time recently. So
yeah. Well, yeah, I've learned too, right, that heating it sometimes is what turns it brown.
Yeah.
There's all these different things. So I'd love to hear more about the prickly pear, because that is something that there are prickly pear plants around here too.
Oh,
so
cool.
Yeah, I'd love to get information from you later on that.
Definitely. You can also make lemonade. Which is great with prickly pear.
Nice, nice. Okay, so let's kind of move on. Thank you for sharing those. There's some gorgeous tans, right?
I know, they're really beautiful yellows. Oh, and then these are just some other pictures of things on our property. So this is some people taking an intro to basket weaving class at our property. This guy made a beer koozie. Actually, it was awesome. It was a great one. And I think the next slide, there's some more images of just classes that we've been doing. Incense making using natural materials.
I couldn't figure out what this was.
Oh yeah, so this is making incense cones.
And is that source material from around the property, or?
I use a combination of different things. Some of them are just types of wood from all over, but I've been trying to use more and more materials from the desert. So things like collecting resin from the brittlebush plant and stuff like that. But so it's kind of a big spectrum, but I'm trying to get it to be more and more local.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I love this bag in the background.
I know. There's just it's a lot of yellow, warm colors in this picture.
Oh, is that the last photo?
Oh, maybe.
Maybe I didn't open up all of them.
Let
me see.
Yeah, Rebecca, the other thing I realized might be easiest is just to go to my website.
Okay. I've got one more photo from this. Let me just reshare this.
Oh yeah, so this is, so our space is called the High Desert Observatory, and I would say about a mile down the road, we teamed up with a friend, Heidi Schweigler, to set up a space called the Yucca Valley Material Lab that focuses on glass mainly. And so this is a picture from the glass studio there, and the Yucca Valley Material Lab does artist residencies and has classes. And so we've been just kind of teaming up, pooled a lot of our resources and equipment together to create this space. So it's been a nice way to create community out here, and also, you know, start a big project by teaming up together, which has been nice.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Joshua Tree too, and kind of you guys have put yourself in a great location, I feel like.
Yeah, we love it. We're super lucky. It's about the nice thing about the Joshua Tree area is it's about 2 hours east of LA, which is really great. And I feel like we're in this nice little triangle between LA, there's some really neat eco-friendly stuff going on in Arizona, and we're close to San Diego. And so we're kind of in the center of this little triangle. But the nice thing about Joshua Tree is there's a lot of really interesting art projects going on, because it's been a place where people can live pretty affordably historically, and have some land and time. So the artist Andrea Zattel has her studio out there. which is pretty amazing. She has a beautiful weaving studio. And if you're ever, it's called AZ West. If you're ever in the area, you should definitely check it out. There's also a little project called the World Famous Crochet Museum, which I love, which was started by Sherry Elf. And it's just this little trailer full of hand crocheted everything in there. But so there's lots of just very like little quirky projects, and then artists coming out here just to have time and space. It's been a nice way, or we're pretty lucky to be out here right now with the pandemic happening. So because in some ways it's not that different for us. We've been sort of kind of self-isolated and have been just kind of trying to build up our own little compound here. But it's also taught me a lot about time, I think, because it's a little bit slower, because we're a little bit more isolated. And you also have you have a very strong dialogue with the natural world here. I think because, to me, I think of living in the desert as similar to living in the jungle, because even though it seems like they're complete opposites, I think they're very similar. The environment and the atmosphere completely permeates everything. The animals and the insects are voracious, and the plants are voracious. You really just can't fight. You can't fight the natural cycle of things here. So one of the big changes for me when I got here is I ended up kind of going to sleep with the sun. Because you really can't fight it. And so I wake up really early and I go to bed really early. And in the summertime, it's best to wake up super early, because the best times to do things are in the early morning and the evening because of the weather. And so it's just your whole life becomes very much in dialogue with the environment here, which is new for me as someone who always lived in cities and grew up in a city. But I like it. It's taught me a lot, and I think it's permeating my work, my studio practice, and then it's also permeating, as you can see, my teaching practice.
Yeah. It's, you always hear about the term siesta, right? And that's like having that, hottest part of the day where you don't do anything, you take a nap. It's fantastic.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it does. But it's interesting, just really, you just have to go with it. There's no point in fighting it here.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to get your website up here.
So this is just an example of some of my other work, so you kind of have some more context.
So you typically will have an idea that you're developing, and then you'll make multiple interpretations of that, or?
Yeah, actually, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, what usually happens is I have an idea that I'm working around, and then I really think while making. I like to start with an idea to help direct me. But I always find as I'm working, that's when synapses start firing in my brain, and I come up with new expressions of that idea. And so a lot of times it does, one thing builds on itself, but it all really comes from being in the studio and having kind of a constant contact with materials. I really think through making.
Where's this located?
This is in northern Scotland. It's in, Bullseye Glass has several galleries across the country, and then also they have this very small project space in the most northern region of Scotland, Latherin Wheel, or one of the most, it's on its way to the most northern region of Scotland. And it's right next to the Northlands Creative Glass Center. And so I had the opportunity to make a piece in this space, which is actually an old barn that's been refurbished. And so yeah, it was a pretty amazing opportunity to make something in this space.
And so how do you then ship these back?
Well, one of the things which I think I actually learned from fiber, is making things in, like quilting, making things in small components that then can be taken apart and reassembled. And so this piece, all the little hanging pieces, they come apart. And so they're actually all teeny tiny little pieces that can be packed up and shipped. And then it's amazing because these little pieces can take up, 16 or 20 feet of space. But it's just because it's just the way they're arranged in space. And then the horse heads, and those are two life-size pony heads. Those are a little bit harder to ship. But they do come apart. They come apart into two sections. So I always try to make my work modular in that way.
That makes sense. Yeah, I love how you hang the work. So this is what you're talking about, how it can take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's something, coming from a textile background, I love the history and theories around string and warps and weaving. And sewing, and I really think about things in space that way. And so, just by hanging a thread, you could hang threads through a giant gallery space, and just by having them 12 inches apart, all of a sudden it'll take up a huge amount of space, but it's just a teeny bit of thread. And so I think just really thinking about playing with space that way can be really generative.
And now, is this fabric or is this glass?
This is leather. It's a combination of things. It's a leather rope that has barbell piercing studs in it, and then it has synthetic hair and horse hair coming out of it, and then the tops of the holders there are cast glass.
Oh, okay.
And it's about I think it's about 4 feet tall, a little over 4 feet.
All right. Is there something specifically that you want me to go to on your site?
No, I just thought it might be helpful as a context.
Let's
since
see.
I didn't send you many pictures.
Sorry. That's all right. So I'll go into some of the questions here now.
Yeah.
So let me kind of stop this. Okay, so did you take any classes that were a major influence for you in school? Were there specific teachers?
Yeah, I was really lucky. I had some great teachers. I went to undergrad at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and one of my teachers there, Annette Cowenberg, was really pivotal for me. Her classes on costume. She's the one that actually got me into fiber. Okay. I was in sculpture before and just wasn't able to find my footing. And the amazing thing about the women in that department is they just said, why don't you just come over here? and you can explore these things and feel comfortable. And I think they created such a safe space for me that I felt comfortable really digging deep into stuff. But yeah, Annette was really amazing for me. Piper Shepard was also teaching there. They both still teach there. She taught screen printing, and so learning about and fabric dyeing, and so that had a huge impact on me. I obviously love dyeing. And then my graduate school advisor and chair, Mark Newport, had a big influence on me too. His work is phenomenal. He now he's doing a lot of mending projects, but he's most well known for this work where he crochets superhero knits. He knits superhero suits for himself. Mark Newport, yeah, he's great. So, but I've been really really lucky to have had great teachers. I think that's how I've gotten through my life, really, is just having these really great teachers that have guided me, and then I taught at the Oregon College of Art and Craft for about 8 years and ran the textile department there. And the dean of the program, who used to be the head of fibers at the Oregon College of Art and Craft, Jisan Lee Isbara, had a big influence on me too. You know, so sometimes it's also colleagues, mentors, teachers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think creating that space where it's okay to learn and try things.
Yeah, try things out, right? That's a big
Yeah.
thing too, and seeing what happens. Okay, what are you currently working on?
What what am I currently working on? I'm working on a couple different projects right now. Things have sort of so I was working on a bunch of things, and then once the pandemic hit, I've sort of stepped back a little bit and have been just kind of rethinking. I've been doing a lot of reading, actually. I've been reading a lot of theory and really just trying to just doing a lot of deep research, because I was in the studio pumping out a lot of work. And once the pandemic really exploded in the States, I started just wanting to spend some time being really quiet and really just kind of researching and relocating myself and thinking about, you know, what is art now, or what should art be? I've also become, a lot of my work is always very large. As you can see, even if it's small, it takes up a lot of space. And I've been thinking a lot about smallness, and I think a lot of people have, actually, you know, smallness, flexibility, maybe even going back to that idea of lots of little things that can take up a lot of space, but then can be small again, because, you know, that works really well from in a physical way and a financial way that works well, but also if you think about it theoretically, that also makes sense. Mm-hmm. I read this great letter. I'll send it to you, Rebecca, by I think the director of Postmasters Gallery in New York, and they were talking about what it means to be a small gallery today, and just the flexibility in that. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. Other than that, I've been making some really strange mosaic 3D mosaic drip castles using scrap glass and from our studio, and sand, and all sorts of weird things like that. So I've been making these really colorful, fun drip castles. I've been working on some new scent work, and then some other sculptural pieces that are going to be in a group show at LVL3 Gallery in Chicago this fall. And that's all kind of, again, thinking about water. But yeah, I felt the desire to really just kind of hold the reins for a little bit and think. But then again, my deadlines will come, so I have to do something.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I like to schedule shows too, is because you have deadlines. You have to get the work done, and sometimes that's what you need to make that happen there.
It's been, in a way, in some ways, not always, for me, the time has been kind of a gift, because I was just pumping out work in the studio for deadlines that I don't think was that good, but I didn't have time to think about it, and I thought it was fine. And then as soon as I had to stop and look at it again, I've just spent some time really critiquing my own work, actually, is what I've been doing. And I'm really grateful to have the moment to maybe pivot, because I don't think we get that often as artists.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. What was the thing that really influenced you the most while you were building your career?
I guess I would just say, like I said, I was really lucky to have wonderful teachers. So I think that also, I guess, accepting opportunity, following opportunities and researching different things as they come. So I never expected to get into glass. And then I had an opportunity to work with it a little bit, and I fell in love with the outcome of it, and started using that. So I think just really not being too tied to what I thought something had to look like, I guess. Not being too tied to what I thought my career had to look like, or where I was going to live, or what materials I was going to work with. I think that that's really important as an artist, is to be flexible. There was a moment where the factory that produces the glass I use couldn't make red glass anymore. They figured it out, but they had to stop making red glass for a little while because of some regulations. And this was in Portland, and a local paper started interviewing artists who work with that glass and saying, what are you going to do now that this place doesn't make red glass anymore? How will this affect your practice? And I just kept imagined thinking, wow, I would really be in a lot of trouble if my entire creative practice hinged on red colored glass. Like, I'm so grateful that that is not my situation. And I've been thinking about that a lot since the pandemic happened, because we have, you know, all of our resources are a lot smaller. And so just thinking about, okay, this doesn't mean I have to stop making. This is an opportunity to use, you know, to use all the scrap material we have, or to start working with sand from my yard, or start painting again, you know, and really just trying to stay flexible. And I think that's who's going to make it through right now, as far as artists go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big thing too, is that, you know, when we're in school too, sometimes you have to choose a specific major and you feel like you need to develop that and focus on that. But taking a variety of different things too is great, because then you're basically making your tool bag bigger. You're kind of, you're having all of these different techniques that you can use, and you have no idea if years down the line, oh, that woodworking class that I took, wow, that's like, you know, making it so important for me right now with this project, or, you know, that you never know what that could do later on in your practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So are there artists that influenced your work?
Yeah, I thought maybe two we could talk about. The first one is Sheila Hicks, which I know Rebecca pulled up some images.
So let's find my site.
So Sheila Hicks is, I would say, a godmother of fiber, the fiber field, and really a personal hero of mine, because she's been making work since the 60s and before, and is still making work now. And she started from a weaving background, but became really interested in the sculptural possibilities of the warp of weaving, and just what thread is, what yarn is, what line is. And so she's just done some really amazing work. And if you guys haven't, for anybody interested in 3D art, if you haven't looked at her work before, I definitely recommend spending some time looking through her work. She's prolific. So this is a perfect example of her work. So but it all came from weaving and then experimenting with taking things off the loom. And so she's just a real pioneer. And then the other person is Marissa Mertz. And Marissa Mertz was an Italian artist. She was working in the 1960s. And she really, I saw this show of hers at the Hammer Museum in LA a couple years ago, and it had a really big impact on me because of just the breadth of materials that she uses. So in this picture, I love this piece. The piece on the floor is actually, she poured wax, that kind of white gray surface on the floor, it's wax. And then she made these little figures out of wax and different materials. She also crocheted things like wire and nylon. So she just got her hands into everything. And you can see a textile perspective, but also just like a painting perspective, a sculptural perspective. And the thing that I love the most about her work is this combination of focus and intention. and a reverence, which is really beautiful to see. And I try to bring that into my own work where, you know, has these really detailed moments, and you can tell she really respects the materials she's working with and she knows about them. But she also has moments where she makes a big move, or something gets broken, or something is rough. And I love that personally. I strive for that in my own work. So I love that kind of that tension in her work.
Yeah, I can see that now, the way you describe that, and see how you take that forward. That's fantastic.
Oh, thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Beautiful work. And I have to say, it really struck me in person. I think I'd seen pictures of her work before, but if you ever get a chance to see her work in person, definitely do it, because it's sculpture work really is so different in person, and especially with this kind of materiality. But she's a good example of somebody just making work with whatever she had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love this piece. It's in person. In person, it's pretty amazing, because it looks like nothing until you look at it from the right angle and it becomes something. You know, I love this kind of combination of a real gentleness and sensitivity, and then also just a real kind of a little bit of anarchy in there too, and a reverence.
It has gorgeous colors with that.
Yeah, really beautiful.
I don't know how many images will.
It probably goes on forever. So.
Okay, so what is it that you, here, let me just close out of this here real quick. What are your favorite projects that you like to share with people who are first starting out exploring fiber arts?
Do you mean, can you tell me what you mean by that?
Okay, yeah.
Ask you.
So if you are, if someone's taking one of your classes and they haven't really done anything with fiber prior, what is a good project that you like to kind of introduce them with?
Well, two of my favorite projects, which I think I know came from my own undergrad experience. One is this idea of abstract mapping. So, and I think that fits in really, really well with things like embroidery, dyeing, piecing, quilting, to think about creating a map using those and what map making can be. And I also love that because then you can start thinking about using thread as a way to draw. And so to me, you start creating these nice connection points, and you don't have to necessarily be a highly skilled fiber person to stitch a line or applique something or start thinking about abstract mapping. And there's some great artists who have coming from like a drawing and painting perspective, who have done some really cool cartography projects and map making projects. And so I love just like using that as a way to get started. And then in my classes where we did more garment making, I like to think about things, this idea of a second skin. Again, this is from a project that I got in undergrad from Annette Kallenberg, and it stayed with me.
Yeah.
So, but this idea of thinking about creating a second skin for yourself, or what a second skin could look like. You know, maybe it's an exoskeleton, maybe it's protection, maybe it's a amulet, but something that you wear. And again, it doesn't have to be highly articulated. It could be a embroidered or pieced together cape. It could be a second skin, could be how you present to the world, you know, so it's just, there's lots and lots of layers to it that you could you could translate from different perspectives. And then another assignment that I used to give people in my sculptural fiber class was constructing a secret. So making a secret either a representation of what a secret might look like, or now I can't, or something that has a secret. And so again, it's like, you know, so you could see, especially if you're learning to sew forms, you know, something could have a secret inside of it. But I also love projects like that don't always they make sense, but you have to think about them for a while. And I love stuff like that. And that's what I learned from my teacher, Annette, was these kind of things that make you sort of roll over them again and again in your head.
Right, because it's not like this is how you do it. There's so many different interpretations on what that could be for each individual as well.
Yeah, and I think that's super important, especially because fiber is such an amazing space for people to just define. It's always been a safe space for people, and a radical space for people, and a place to explore materiality. And so I think it's really nice when it still has that kind of quality to it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the last question, I think you kind of already talked about it, but is there anything that you've done differently since COVID-19 quarantine began? And you've kind of talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is I've been working on figuring out how to put my curriculum online for the workshops I do, and how to start thinking about how people are going to take in information in the future. And so, again, that's just been a lot of kind of looking, listening, researching, and trying to stay flexible. I did want to share this quote with you guys, though.
Yes,
Can you relate
share that
to it all, if that's okay?
Yeah.
I know I'm almost at time, so.
Oh no, you are fine. This is fabulous. Okay, let me kind of get this up. Oh, that's the wrong one.
Time folds right next to it.
Right there. Okay.
So one of the things that I've been talking with people about, one of the great things about the pandemic, which has not been great, but one of the plus sides is I've actually connected with a lot of people. I've spent a lot of time on Zoom, a lot of time on the phone with friends and family, and that's been really nice, and a really nice way to kind of check in and talk about art and just our perception of the world right now. And one of the things that kept coming up when I talked to different artist friends was this idea of time, and just how time feels either static, or it feels slower or faster. Everyone's having a different experience of time right now. And it reminded me of this quote by the author Margaret Atwood. And the thing I like about this quote is it talks about time, but it talks about time in a way that relates to textiles.
Do you want to read the quotes?
Yeah, so okay. The quote is, again, and it's one of those things you just have to kind of keep rolling around in your head. So it's from her book, The Tent. And she said, "Time folds," he said, "meaning that as time goes on, it buckles in the extreme heat, in the extreme cold, and what is one past becomes closer. You can demonstrate this by pleating a ribbon and sticking a pin through it. Point 2, once yards away from point 1, now lies just beside it. Is time-space like an accordion, but without the music? Was he making a statement about hard physics? Or was he saying time folds its wings at long last? Time folds its tents and silently steals away. Time folds you in its folds, as if you were a lamb and the lack of time a wolf. Time folds you in the blanket of itself, folds you tenderly and wraps you round. For where would you be with it, without it? Time folds you in its arms and gives you one last kiss, and then it flattens you and folds you out and folds you up and tucks you away until it's time for you to become someone else's pastime, and then time folds again." And I just thought, to me, I just love thinking about the infinity of textiles and sewing, and then this relationship to time and space and literature. So Margaret Atwood is the author who wrote The Handmaid's Tale.
Okay, yep. Yeah, so yeah, her writing is really beautiful too, and it just makes this concept so much more kind of interesting and epic to kind of think about as well. And the thing is too with fiber arts is, yes, there's so much time that's involved with it, right? And so a lot of people aren't really aware of that epic nature. I'm currently working on a weaving that has it's fabric, and when I first thought of it, I was like, all right, yeah, I'll do this. I'll just kind of throw these strips of fabric together. I'll just cut, a few of these, and this will kind of work out fine. And then it's just been hour upon hour upon hour of getting that done. Katie and I, we talk a lot too about different projects, and she has a long experience with knitting and a lot of different fiber arts too, and about how there's this thing that you just kind of get lost in it too. And there's something really beautiful about that too. And right now there's something really nice about just kind of being in this process that you're developing.
Completely. When the pandemic first hit, I really didn't know what to do with myself. And so I actually just started sewing because I like the idea of making. So I actually just sewed. I was doing maybe a garment a day or a garment and a half a day. Wow. And when I say garment, I mean like a rectangle with a hole, not that fancy, but just like no color. I was just using all the scrap material I had, and I was just sewing and sewing and sewing. And it was really nice because I knew I was doing something and solving problems, and I felt really focused, but time was going by. And then my plan was to it's all undyed fiber that I had. And so my plan was then, after I finished sewing, to then go and dye things in a big cycle. But I just liked that something to just like launch myself into making something, and something where it could also use that time as kind of meditative time.
Yeah. Well, do you guys have any questions for Emily?
We want to come visit.
Yes, you should. You should. Whenever thing calms down, please come visit. We have, if you do come visit, you can always shoot me an email on my website, either Emily Endo or High Desert Observatory, and I'll give you a tour of our space and the material lab.
Okay.
Yeah.
The idea of like having classes on your property and having like a permaculture farm, that's always been my dream. Or like recently it's been my dream to have I've been interested in permaculture recently.
Oh, cool.
I've been mostly just watching YouTube videos of like how couples do it on their like small property, and like how you can use such a small space and get so much product out of it. But yeah, no, that's very cool, and that's something that I would definitely want to check out and see in person.
Yeah, you should come visit. Well, the nice thing about where you guys are too, it's such fertile land. Oh my gosh. We're in the desert is a kind of a whole other. It's very extreme, so there's definitely been a steep learning curve in planting. Because of the extreme heat and extreme cold. But yeah, come visit.
Yeah, that would be cool.
We have a prickly pear cactus that grows down at the corner. We're still going to go see about making dye out of it.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. Yeah, I now have to I have envelopes from the school that I was going to use to write to different houses if I see them, like, hey, can I use some of this for natural dyeing for the classes to make it seem more professional?
I love that idea.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Natalie, you guys will have to report back if you try it out there.
I really should try it. They wouldn't even notice. Like, the cactus is out of control. You wouldn't even notice if a hunk fell off. Yeah, that's super cool.
This is recorded now, so
we would ask.
We would ask. We kind of. Well, very cool.
Yeah.
I like how you're how the environment plays into how you create, of that you've gotten different ideas because of where you've moved, and just the idea that now you're focused on water, and that all has to do because you made this move and that's what you're surrounded by.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been really exciting that it happened really naturally too. You know, I think it's really neat when all of a sudden something, some kind of shift causes you to think about things differently, gives you some new ideas. I also get that from reading. I meant to mention, I'm currently reading a couple different books that have really, I found really helpful in this current state of affairs that we're in. This is called Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Thulacine by Donna J. Haraway. And she is a writer along with a whole group of people who are doing a lot of writing about nature, ecology, and our enmeshed relationship with them. And it comes out of a post-humanist feminist perspective. And so to understand that more, I started reading A Feminist Companion to the Post-Humanities. But when she said, they say post-humanities, what they really, which is a great book because it's got a whole collection of essays on that, some by Donna Haraway, some by other people. But when they say post-humanities, they don't mean that humans are over and we're going to be taken over by computers. What it means is humans not being the only focus of our world. So starting to look at our relationship to time, to space, to the environment, and also bringing a feminist perspective in there. And I found that completely lines up with, there's a lot about water in that idea, that metaphor of water. And I found that finding some theory and some research and reading has really helped me come up with new ideas and keep making work.
Yeah, I like how your projects turn into research projects.
Thanks.
I like that you make time to know what you're making and be educated on what you're making.
Well, I think it really helps, and it helps you keep going, you know? I think it helps. Yeah, but I wish I was in school again. I want reading assignments and and lectures on topics. So, but
yeah, I think that once you're a teacher too, you see how to kind of find the information and find the things that will just educate yourself as well, right? So it's like you're kind of finding these books that kind of go along with what you're interested in. And that I look at the research process as part of the studio process as well, right? So you are still investing time into your work, and it's just kind of a different way of doing that, right? And so when you're in school, you're kind of given these items to read for the class, but now you have to kind of do that for yourself, right?
But it really helps. I know it helps when you get out of school or even on summer, like over a break. But when you're out of school, to have those things that kind of keep you going so you feel like you're in a conversation. And one of the things that really struck me about moving out here was that I thought I was already doing that for myself, but then I realized I really had to actively seek out reading and podcasts and making time to discuss things with people, because we are pretty isolated out here. We have a great community, but we are isolated. And I think everybody's going through that now with social isolation and quarantine. But it's been a really good lesson of just like really holding yourself accountable to that, because it helps you keep moving forward. Definitely.
Yeah, moving forward, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me into your Zoom classroom.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any more questions that we have? Okay. Yeah, you've been fantastic. This was great to be able to also, for me, to connect up with you again. So if anyone's watching this who is going to be watching my other videos, I was in the same studio with Emily as Jeremy Davis, and so possibly Michelle Raymond, who I'm going to interview as well. So you know, it's interesting how, you know, you never know, you know, the people that you're around when you're younger. It's great to keep in touch with as well. So
I know, I love that.
So, okay, well, thank you so much, Emily, and I'll kind of connect up with the video, some of these links, so that people can also be able to access them as well and be able to contact you there. So,